It's also important to know how to read the book of Revelation, because over the last 2,000 years, there have been 4 different ways that Christians have read this book. And the most recent way of reading it really only occurred about 150 years ago. But it's the way that movie I just mentioned, A Thief in the Night, it's the reading of that. How many of y'all read any of the Left Behind books? Anybody read any of the Left Behind books? So this particular way of reading it is the motivation behind the Left Behind books, and it's called the Futurist view. And the Futurist view on Revelation is that it's about what's going to happen in the very end, right before the end of time and Jesus returns. So what futurists are always doing and always looking for is signs for the beginning of the end. And it's really popular for televangelists, but we got to remember that every generation has had people who thought that the end was happening. When the plague swept through Europe, they thought this is the beginning of the end. For many people, when Hitler came to power, Stalin came to power, this is the beginning of the end. For some people, 30 years ago, when Mikhail Gorbachev rose to power, they said he's the Antichrist because he's got the birthmark that is mentioned in Revelation. When the European Union formed and there were 10 nations in the European Union, a lot of people said, well, that's the 10-headed beast that we see the imagery for in Revelation. But then all of a sudden there were 11 members of the European Union, and 12, and 15, and 17, and now there are 27 members there. But futurists are always watching the news, looking for signs of the beginning of the end. But that's only one way to read Revelation, and it's the most recent way. Second school of thought is called the Historicist view. And this perspective was the dominant view for Christians for about 500 years until the 1800s. And this view says that every chapter of John's Revelation is about a different period of time in history starting in 95 AD. So according to this view, chapters 6, 7, and 8 of the book of Revelation are about the fall of the Roman Empire. Chapter 9 is about the rise of ancient Islam. Chapter 10 is about the Protestant Reformation. And so this view says that Revelation is about an ongoing history. Some of that history has happened. Some of that history has yet to happen. A third way to look at the book of Revelation is the preterist school of thought. And preterist simply means the past. And this view says that most of what we read in the book of Revelation is about what was happening in the time of John in the first century. The persecution he's describing is not persecution that is to come, it's persecution that was going on in the Roman Empire in the first century. And then one other perspective is the symbolic view. Some people call it the idealistic view. And this says that the book of Revelation is not describing any actual events in the past or the present or the future. The symbolic view is that Revelation really is about the kinds of spiritual conflicts that happen in every generation and within every person, every follower of Jesus in every time and place. Because, this view would say in every generation, there's a beast. In every generation, there's a temptation to take on the mark of the beast. In every generation, there's conflict between good and evil, and ultimately God wins. God wins. That's the symbolic view of Revelation. So these are the 4 predominant views of the book of Revelation. And just wondering, how would you place yourself in those? So I'll tell you where I place myself. I think I'm a combination of 3 of the 4 of those. Here's why. I think that a big part of the book of Revelation was about what was happening in John's day, that he's describing the persecution of Christians by Rome, and so that would make me a preterist in part. At the same time, I think Revelation describes the ongoing battle of good and evil in our world and in ourselves, and so that sort of makes me an idealist or a part symbolic. And at the same time, I think that the last 3 chapters of Revelation are about the second coming of Jesus that have not yet happened but will happen. So that makes me part futurist. And I don't know how you see the book of Revelation, but I would ask you, just look at why you believe what you believe. How did you come to that belief? And know that there are other ways to look at it.